Hello, I'm Nigel Harrington, and I'm going to be talking today about the English Civil War, which is very exciting for everyone because, war sometimes is civil, I guess, yeah. Now, this is a memo that I have from the senior partners of the law firm of Plantagenet, Tudor and Stewart, where I work. Apparently, this is not a send-up. It seems the wonky Parliament is all buggered up about the royals and are making a case against our Charles I. Charles I, of course, is, one of the greatest monarchs that I've been aware of. I do need you all to get swatted up, studied, and prepared for the defense of your lives. Interesting. You are Charles I's legal defense. Oh, that's a bit of a typo there. It should not be legal defense, it's legal. I think a legal defense is probably just some dog court. This image is from the trial that took place in Parliament. Now, we should probably tell you a bit about, why he's being tried. He does stand accused of starting a war against the citizen-elected parliament, which is a bit interesting, but they do call it citizen-elected because they were elected by the citizens, I guess. And then this really long bit, for wicked designs, wars, and evil practices of him, the said Charles Stuart, have been and are carried on for the advancement and upholding of his personal interest of will, power, and pretended prerogative, to himself and his family against the public interest, common right, liberty, justice, yada yada, and so forth. Now, prerogative means right to exclusive privilege, so this is a bit interesting to read. Why don't you go ahead and pause it and try to sum up the charges, and we'll see what you did. So just go ahead and pause, and we'll see what happens. You paused it, right? Good, because we're gonna crack on then. So he's charged for starting a civil war and ruling like an absolute monarch, which is a bit, odd because he is an absolute monarch. The whole thing is about absolute monarchy and where power comes from. And you'll see that there's going to be a bit of a struggle that we'll, get into. But as I don't know if you how much English history you know at this point, we're going to, do a bit of a background. So you should probably be taking some notes at this point because, it's all very important. So the English government, of course, is ruled by a monarch, our Charles, who inherited his position from, James, etc., who got it from Elizabeth, and it does go back in a line. It's interesting to know all the monarchs. But there's, of course, this Parliament. Parliament, their job is one thing and one thing only. They're in charge of taxation. So if you want to have new taxes, you need to call Parliament. Oh, I just let that slip, didn't I? You don't always need Parliament. You can actually dismiss them if you like, if you are king. But if you want new taxes on the books, you need to call Parliament. They're quite adamant about that. They really would like to be a full-time thing, but they are not at this point. The king cannot add taxes, although our Charles does find a couple of ways to, raise funds. Sometimes he digs up old taxes on the books that have not been enforced, and he uses those to collect funds. Smart, isn't it? He can also adjust fines, which isn't a new tax, it's just adjusting fines. Now, historically, there's been a constant struggle between the monarchs and Parliament over this issue of taxes. Now, it should be noted at this point that, yes, merchants, of course, do feel that, taxes, but realistically, we are taxed far less than, let's say, France. So this is Charles I, looking rather suave there. He reigned from 1625 till 1649, which is where we are today. He is king of both England and Scotland, which is a bit of an interesting, story. It starts because James, of course, was king of Scotland when Elizabeth died. And then he inherited the English throne, and then he became king both of England and Scotland. One king, two kingdoms. There'll be some trouble, so don't worry about that. Now, Charles I, of course, did inherit some debt from both Elizabeth and James, and the 30 Years' War that's been raging, there was money needed for it. So, of course, in order to get funds, you can just raise tax. Oh, right, he can't raise taxes because, of course, wonky Parliament's in charge of taxes. So Charles calls Parliament for a tax increase. Smart, right? They say, no, we're not going to raise taxes. So he says, fine, bye-bye. Kicks them out because, quite frankly, they're not doing their job. If we are attacked, you do need to raise taxes to pay for the war. It just makes financial sense. So instead, Charles used some old tax laws, they were forgotten, for short-term funding. He fined, this is amusing, anyone who did not attend his coronation, because it was on the books, so he could. So this short-term funding is, works okay, but not in the long run. So in 1628, he does call Parliament again. Parliament, of course, holds his feet to the fire and says, fine, we'll give you your tax increase if you sign the Petition of Right. Now, this does seem like it's what bribery or some sort of quid pro quo. It just does not sit right with me personally. But regardless, he does say you do need to sign this if you want the tax increase. So the Petition of Right does a few things. First of all, primarily it does put the law above the king, which, as we are, that should not be. It doesn't really seem right. I know, Magna Carta, it goes back to it, but really, let's move forward. The Petition of Rights has four main things. The king cannot put people in prison without due cause. We've called this something today. If you know what it is, write that down. It says he cannot levy taxes without parliamentary consent. He could not house soldiers in private homes. And finally, he could not impose martial law in peacetime. Charles agrees to the petition because he knows the more important thing to do is to get some sort of taxation. So he does agree to the petition, although, there's going to be some issues, because Charles believes it does go against the absolute nature of absolutism. So he ignores it to make peace with France and Spain, gets rid of that wonky parliament, and continues to raise his fees instead of revenue. He rules from 1628 to 1640 without parliament. That, of course, is called the personal rule, where he simply is in charge of the country by himself. So things go smashing, although lots of anger, from 1628 to 1640. But then something interesting happens, and this, of course, starts with Scotland. Now, there is some religious conflict. Charles, again, is king of both England and Scotland, both of which have different churches. England's is the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, and there are many Puritans around. I know Oliver Cromwell, of course, is one of them, and, he's a bit of a dullard, if you ask me, What doesn't like Christmas, dancing, fun? If he was in charge of the country, God knows. But regardless, there's also the Scots or the Presbyterians. Now, Charles thought it would be a bit easier, makes sense, to have everyone the same religion, so he changed the Scottish Book of Prayer to not the exact same, but it pretty much is the English Book of Common Prayer. The Scots do not like this. They feel like they're being changed. Religion is very important to them, so they rebel, raise an army, and they threaten England. Now, I don't know if you have a sibling. I do. He's a bit annoying. Into Scotland's kind of like that, a bit annoying. Now, if your little brother said that, he's going to raise an army against you, potentially a bunch of other little, brothers, so it'd be a bit pestering, but regardless, of course you defend yourself. It just makes sense. You need to defend yourself. Scotland declared war on England. The king needs money to finance a war. Now, of course, Parliament should probably jump on it because, quite frankly, it's defending England. But Parliament's up to it again. So Charles calls Parliament, April of 1640. They don't do anything. They do not do what he wants. So he says goodbye. They were there for about 3 weeks. It's often called the Short Parliament because they met for just a short time. So then we have 1641. He needs to call it again. So he calls what's called the Long Parliament. It's called the Long Parliament because they do serve for quite a long time. Mostly, they're already against the king. You have to be elected to be on this. You run for election, laws are running against the king, and they say, fine, Charles, We'll raise taxes, but only if you limit your power, which again does not sit right with me. But, apparently I'm a bit biased. Giles says that, maybe these members are working with the Scots. That's why they're not putting country above, kingdom. So he, and you know what? Do you know what? There might be some evidence that they are actually working with the Scots. Regardless, he goes to make an arrest. The heads of Parliament, he goes to Parliament, he goes to the Parliament floor, walks in. I imagine he looked very regal doing that. But seriously, he's a king. Can you not do anything that does not look regal? I don't think so. Regardless, he got there, and guess who was not there? The 5 heads, they of course had been tipped off. Again, does not sit right with me. So, because he did this, went to go arrest the 5 heads of Parliament, Parliament got a bit upset, and they said that Charles invaded the House of Commons. He invaded. They say, of course, that Charles started the war by doing this invasion. I do have another view, but regardless, this is when the English Civil War starts. Now, if the copyright was not so, high, there would be a bit of a musical interlude at this point, but of course, we can't do it. Perhaps, maybe, in class, your teacher will let you have a little musical accompaniment. So regardless, now the country is divided up into 2 camps. The Royalists, of course, often called the Cavaliers, although that's not that's a bit pejorative at points. These Royalists fight for the king. They, of course, believe in absolute monarchy. They are wealthier, and they do wear their hair long, as you should. And they have plumed hats, often wearing plumed hats like that. Good job. On the other side, of course, we have the Roundheads, which again is a bit of a pejorative term. They are for the Parliament. They are fighting for the Parliament. They believe in constitutional monarchy, and some of them did have short hair. They cut the hair around their ears, hence the term Roundheads. Oh yes, and they do want Charles to have the permanent haircut, of course. So, we're not going to get too into the specifics of this, but as you can see, at first we have the Royalists. They are this gold colour, which is a great colour. They are pretty much in control of the north. They get some territory in 1643. However, by the end of it, quite frankly, no, it does not go well. The tides changed quite dramatically in 1644 with Oliver Cromwell, who was quite frankly just terrible in my opinion. In 1645, there was a battle at Naseby right here. Now, it's a bit odd what happened. The king was attempting to charge to lead troops into battle, as he should, but he was interrupted. He was pulled back. Now, people saw the king being pulled back, and they thought everyone should. They did not realize that someone was stopping the king, not everyone else. So everyone pulled back, and it was a bit of a disaster for the Royalists. And so, after a series of battles, the king, who was in disguise, snuck away and actually turned himself into the Scots. Then, eventually, for a price, the Scots turned him over to Parliament. And that pretty much ended the Civil War at that point in 1645. Although, yes, and this one is pretty bad, while in captivity, he did try to make a deal with the Scots to say that he would establish Presbyterianism in England, if they, of course, would support him. I know, this does not sit right. This did lead to more battles, but they, of course, were, crushed by Oliver Cromwell, who doesn't like dancing. So that's it. He's on trial now for inciting a civil war and not pretending, but being an absolute monarch. Now, what you're going to be doing is, in small groups, you are going to be looking at this English Civil War and seeing if you can defend Charles. Now, to make things a bit sporting, we do need some people to take the side of Parliament, so why don't we go ahead and do that? And, have a bit of a discussion or debate, so this way we can, see how things go, see where things stand, see what you think, and hopefully we'll find a good outcome which will not lead to his death. Again, the charges are starting a war against the citizen-elected parliament and basically for being an absolute monarch. So look through this presentation again, find areas in which you can either defend or accuse the king, find evidence if you can. Feel free to use your textbook or other sources, that would be fine. Okay, thank you.